My wife said she was at her writing group. I found a medical receipt in her drawer. I want to tell you about the night I found a piece of paper in my wife's dresser that answered every question I'd been too scared to ask for 6 months. It was a Tuesday in late October. The kind of night in Denton, Texas, where it's finally cool enough to breathe after 6 months of heat that sits on your chest like something alive. I'd just gotten home from a double shift at Marco's. 11 hours on my feet, flour on my forearms, smelling like garlic and burnt mozzarella the way you do when you've worked a kitchen long enough that the smell just becomes yours. I was 34 years old, tired in a way that went past physical, and all I wanted was to take a shower and lie down next to my wife and not think about anything for 8 hours. Rachel was already in bed. Carol's door was half open, and I stopped there like I always did. Just stood in the hallway for a moment looking at her. 6 years old, arms thrown wide across her pillow, mouth slightly open. She slept like she owned the world. I stood there probably 30 seconds longer than I needed to, and then I went to the bedroom to change. I knocked Rachel's sweater off the dresser. When I bent down to pick it up, the top drawer had slid open maybe 2 inches from the impact, and I saw the corner of a folded paper. I wasn't snooping. I was just a tired guy in a flour-covered shirt picking up a sweater that fell on the floor. But I looked. Because somewhere in the back of my skull, something had been quietly keeping score for 6 months, and it recognized what it was seeing before I did. Glenview Women's Health Center. Date of service, April 14th. Gynecological examination. Blood panel. STI screening. I read it 4 times. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed and read it again. Rachel was 6 feet away from me, breathing slow and even in the dark. And I sat there with this piece of paper in my hands and felt something shift in my chest. Not break, not yet. More like the moment before something breaks when you can feel exactly what's about to happen and there's nothing you can do to stop it. April 14th was 3 days after she came back from that Bachelorette Weekend. You need to know who Rachel was before I tell you what I found out. Not because it excuses anything, it doesn't, but because understanding who she was is the only way to understand how completely I didn't see it coming. We met in 2013 at a cookout in somebody's backyard off Scripture Street. The kind of gathering where you don't know half the people and you end up talking to a stranger for 3 hours because she makes you laugh harder than anyone has in years. Rachel was like that. Quick, observant. She noticed things about people and said them out loud in a way that was sharp but never mean. And I remember driving home that night thinking I needed to see her again, or I'd regret it the rest of my life. 11 years. That's what I'm telling you about. 11 years of a life I built around this woman and our daughter. I worked. That was my contribution, my function, the thing I showed up and did every single day without complaint. Marco's paid decent for Denton, about $22 an hour, plus tips on the nights I covered the front. And with doubles, I could clear close to $60,000 a year. Not rich, not struggling, either. The house helped. My Aunt Ruth left it to me when she passed in 2020, this solid 3-bedroom, on a quiet street with a live oak in the backyard that Carol had already started eyeing for a treehouse. The mortgage was low. We were okay. Rachel was complicated in the way that some genuinely intelligent people are when they haven't quite found their place yet. And I understood that, or I told myself I did. The MLM thing about 4 years back, God, she got pulled into one of those wellness company pyramids by a friend, and within 6 months our spare bedroom was stacked floor to ceiling with boxes of protein powder and detox tea, and these little foil packets of supplements with names like MetaClean and Vital Core that were going to, apparently, change people's lives. She became relentless about it. Cornering other parents at Carol's school, texting old friends she hadn't talked to in years. She had scripts, she had a system. She genuinely believed, and that was the thing that kept me from saying what I was thinking, because you don't want to be the person who kills something your wife actually believes in. I should have said something. In retrospect, I know that, but I didn't. And we ended up $8,000 in credit card debt with a spare room that smelled like artificial vanilla for the better part of a year. When it collapsed, she cried for 3 days straight. Carol was 4 at the time and kept bringing Rachel her stuffed rabbit, this ratty gray bunny she'd had since she was a baby, and laying it in her mom's lap without saying anything. 4 years old, already trying to fix things she didn't understand. After the MLM fell apart, Rachel decided she was going to write, and the thing is, she actually could. She'd always kept journals. Always had a way with words. And when she started posting stories on those platforms, the response was real. Not huge, but real. $40, $50 a month. Comments from strangers telling her her work had moved them. She'd come find me in the kitchen sometimes and read me a paragraph she was proud of, and I'd listen and tell her it was good, because it was good. I meant it. Then she found the writers group, and for a while, everything felt better than it had in years. She started going last September. Twice a week. Wednesdays and Saturdays. She'd come home at 10:30, with this lit-up energy she hadn't had in a long time. She'd sit at the kitchen table while I finished the dishes and just talk. About the people she was meeting, about this woman named Priya who wrote these precise, heartbreaking stories about her grandmother, about a guy named Don who'd been working on the same novel for 12 years, about feedback she'd gotten on her own work that was finally making her better. I loved those nights. I want to be honest about that because it's part of the story. I would stand at the sink in that kitchen after 11 hours on my feet, tired down to my bones, and listen to my wife talk about something that made her happy. And I would feel okay. Like things were going to be okay. Like the MLM years and the debt and the hard patches were behind us, and we were finally settling into something good. Carol would sometimes wake up when Rachel came home and pat out in her pajamas, wanting to know what mommy did tonight. Rachel would scoop her up and say, "We talked about stories, bug." And Carol would say, "What kind of stories?" And Rachel would make something up on the spot, some little fairy tale that Carol would half listen to before going limp in her arms, already falling back asleep. I'd watch the two of them from the hallway and think, this is it. This is the thing. Then Becca's Bachelorette Weekend happened, and Rachel drove 2 hours north to some suburb outside of Fort Worth on a Friday afternoon, and she came back Sunday evening different than she'd left. I noticed it immediately. I want to be clear about that. I noticed it immediately. The moment she walked in the door. Something in the way she moved through the house. Something in the hug she gave me that lasted about 1 second less than it should have. But I didn't say anything, because what was I going to say? You feel different. That's not a sentence you can say to your wife without sounding like you've lost your mind. She gave me short answers about the weekend. One day she said they'd gone to a wine bar Friday night. The next day she mentioned something about a dinner, and the timeline didn't match. I told myself memory is like that. Details get blurry. Maybe the weekend had just been kind of a blur. I was good at telling myself things. The physical stuff was harder to rationalize. Rachel had never been especially affectionate in a showy way. That wasn't her. But we'd always had that easy physical comfort you build with someone after a decade. She stopped reaching for my hand. She'd go tense when I put my arm around her while we stood in the kitchen. One night about a month after the weekend, I came up behind her and put my hands on her shoulders, and she actually flinched. Just a small, quick movement, gone in half a second, but I felt it go through her, and I stood there with my hands on her shoulders, feeling like a stranger in my own house. I gave her space. I told myself it was a rough patch. I told myself I was probably reading too much into things. 6 months of telling myself things. And then October, and the receipt. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Rachel in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and felt the pieces rearrange themselves into a shape I didn't want to look at directly. Every small thing I'd filed away over 6 months. Every short answer and flinched shoulder and 1 second too brief hug. The date on the receipt. The timing. I thought about Carol asleep down the hall. I thought about Aunt Ruth's house, the live oak in the backyard, the mortgage I'd been paying with kitchen shifts. I thought about standing at the sink, listening to Rachel talk about her writing group and feeling like things were going to be okay. By about 3 a.m., I'd stopped trying to find another explanation. There wasn't one. And the grief of that, the specific grief of watching something you believed in turn out to be something else entirely. That's a hard thing to describe. It doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in waves, each one a different shade. First, it's disbelief. Then it's this horrible backward math where you start recalculating everything you thought was real. Then, somewhere around 4 a.m., it just becomes a dull, massive weight sitting on your sternum, and you realize you're going to be carrying it for a long time. The next morning, Rachel took Carol to a play date at her friend Madison's house, 2 blocks over. I watched their car pull out of the driveway from the kitchen window. Then I picked up Rachel's phone from the counter. Her passcode was Carol's birthday. I'd seen her type it 100 times. I don't want to describe everything I found. Some of it I've worked hard to put in a box and not open. What I'll tell you is that it was extensive. The app was there, one of the dating ones with an innocent-looking icon. The conversations were there, photos, dates, and times going back to April, stretching through the summer, into fall. A whole parallel calendar of a life I hadn't known about, running alongside mine every Wednesday and Saturday while I was at Marco's making other people's food and thinking my wife was talking about narrative structure with a woman named Priya. I put the phone down on the counter and stood in that kitchen for probably 10 minutes without moving. Just stood there. Outside, it was a regular Saturday morning in October, 63 degrees, the neighbor's kid riding his bike up and down the sidewalk, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the world doing its thing, completely indifferent. I called Gail. Gail was one of the original members of the writers group. I'd heard Rachel mention her enough times to remember the name. I found her through a community arts page online. She picked up on the third ring, and I introduced myself as Rachel's husband. And within about 15 seconds of me explaining why I was calling, I could hear in Gail's voice that she'd been waiting for this conversation. Rachel had stopped coming to the group sometime in April. She'd told the remaining members that her husband was controlling, that he didn't like her leaving the house, that she was dealing with a difficult home situation. She'd made me the reason she'd disappeared. In the story she'd told these people who had never met me, I was the problem. I was the obstacle. I was the villain. I thanked Gail and hung up and sat down at the kitchen table and put my face in my hands. I'm a guy who shows up. That's the thing I kept coming back to sitting there. I show up every day. I work 11-hour shifts and come home smelling like a kitchen. And I help Carol with her reading. And I pay the bills on time. And I listen to my wife talk about her writing because I want her to have something that makes her happy. That's who I am. That's the thing I built my life around being. And she told strangers I was the reason she couldn't leave the house. When Rachel came home, Carol ran ahead of her through the front door and made a beeline for the living room and her Legos, the way she always did, completely in her own world. Rachel came through behind her and stopped when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in front of me. She knew. I saw it happen in her face. Not surprise, more like the specific relief of something you've been dreading finally arriving. She sat down across from me without taking off her jacket. She started talking before I said a word. I need to... Okay. She pressed both hands flat on the table. I need to tell you something and I need you to just let me say it because if you stop me, I don't think I'm going to be able to start again. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. The Bachelorette thing. She stopped, took a breath. Becca's Bachelorette, in Fort Worth. Something happened at the bar. There was this guy and I had way too much to drink and I don't really know how to explain how it happened. It happened, and I told myself the whole drive home that it was just this one stupid thing. It didn't mean anything. I was drunk. It wasn't me, you know? Like, it wasn't me making that choice. She shook her head. I know how that sounds. I know. From the living room, I could hear Carol narrating to herself, the quiet running commentary she kept up when she was building something. This one goes here. No, that's wrong. Okay, this part. I kept thinking I was going to tell you, Rachel said. I kept waking up and thinking today I'm going to say something, but then I'd look at you and I'd think, I don't know what I thought, that it would just go away, that I could just carry it and eventually it would get smaller and smaller and just disappear. Like if I didn't say it out loud, it wasn't completely real. She laughed, a short, awful sound. That sounds insane. I know that sounds insane. She was crying now, not loud, just tears running down, voice going tight. And then I don't know what happened. I genuinely don't know, and I've thought about this so many times and I still don't understand it. It was like the guilt was so big that I broke. Something broke. And instead of fixing it, she trailed off, shook her head again. I don't know how to explain it. It was like I'd already done the worst thing, so what was the point of... She stopped herself. I know how that sounds. I still hadn't said anything. I don't think I could have. The group, she said. I stopped going in April. I know I should have told you. I just couldn't look at those people and pretend I couldn't sit there and workshop stories about real human feelings when She wiped her face with her palm. I told them you didn't let me come. I said you were controlling. I said it was a home situation. She looked at me then, direct for the first time. That wasn't true. I need you to know that wasn't true. You were never anything but good to me. I just needed a reason. And you were the easiest one to use because you weren't there to say anything. That one landed differently than the rest. I felt it somewhere specific in my chest, a different kind of hurt than everything else she'd said. 11 years of showing up, of doubles and $8,000 in MLM debt I paid down without a word, and listening at the sink every Wednesday and Saturday night, and I was the easiest one to use. Show me your phone, I said. She went still. Rachel, show me your phone. She looked at the table for a long moment. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and put it down between us. Didn't unlock it, just put it there. I slid the phone across the table toward her. Unlock it. Her hands were shaking when she typed in the code. She pushed it back to me and then looked away, out the kitchen window at the backyard where it was almost dark, the live oak just a shape against the gray sky. I looked at the phone for maybe 30 seconds. That was enough. I put it face down on the table. The furnace kicked on. From the living room, Carol was still narrating, fully absorbed, no idea what was happening 20 feet away from her. No, not that one. The red one. Where's the red one? I sat there looking at my wife, who was looking out the window, and I felt something I still have trouble naming. Not rage? I kept waiting for rage, and it didn't come. Not even sadness yet, not the full weight of it. Mostly I felt like the floor had dropped 6 inches, and I was still standing, and the strange mechanical part of my brain was already noting that I was still standing, and needed to figure out what to do next. Eventually, Carol appeared in the kitchen doorway holding a half-built Lego house, missing one wall, wanting to know if I'd seen a specific red piece. I looked at her standing there in her socks on the tile floor and I said, "Check the blue bin in your room, bug." She looked between me and Rachel for just a second. Kids notice things. She noticed something. And then she disappeared back down the hallway. Rachel still hadn't looked at me. "I'm going to call my brother," I said. "You should figure out where you're staying tonight." I'm not going to walk you through every step of the divorce because parts of it are still raw and parts of it aren't mine alone to tell. What I'll say is that I got a lawyer the following week. Rachel got one too. The house was clean. Aunt Ruth had left it specifically to me. My name only. And that held up without a fight. Carol was harder. Carol is still harder. We went through mediation. We went through a custody evaluation where a stranger sat across from me in a beige office in downtown Denton and asked me about my relationship with my daughter, and I answered every question as honestly as I could. And I thought about those $40 writing checks in the MLM boxes and the Bachelorette Weekend and standing at the sink listening to Rachel talk about Priya stories, and I kept my voice level because Carol needed me to keep my voice level. I got primary custody. Rachel has visitation. Every other weekend Wednesday evenings. It's what the evaluator recommended and what the judge approved, and it's what we live with now. The first Wednesday Rachel picked Carol up for her evening visit. I stood at the front window and watched Carol run down the driveway and climb into Rachel's car, and I felt something I still don't have a clean word for. Not relief. Not grief. Some specific combination of the two that I think only exists in that particular moment. Watching your kid run toward the person who broke your family, like it's the most natural thing in the world, because for her, it is. For Carol, her mom is still her mom. That doesn't change. That shouldn't change. I know that. But it's hard to watch. About 2 months after we separated, Carol and I were eating dinner. I'd made her pasta, the simple butter and parmesan she'd been requesting since she was old enough to point at food, and she put her fork down and looked at me with those serious brown eyes she gets sometimes, and said completely out of nowhere, "Daddy, why did you and Mommy stop loving each other?" I put my own fork down. I'd thought about this question. I'd rehearsed answers in the shower, in the car driving home from Marco's, lying awake at 2 a.m. I had a whole prepared response about how grown-ups sometimes change, and how both her parents loved her more than anything, and how that would never change. None of it came out. What I said was, I didn't stop. I don't think that's exactly what happened, bug. She looked at me for a moment, processing this, the way she does. Then she said, "Did Mommy stop?" And I sat there across from my 6-year-old daughter with a bowl of butter pasta between us, and I genuinely didn't know what to say. Not because there wasn't an answer, but because every true answer was one I couldn't give her. Not yet. Maybe not for years. "I think Mommy got confused for a while," I said finally, "but she loves you. That part I know for sure." Carol seemed to consider this. Then she picked her fork back up and said, "Okay," and went back to her pasta. And I sat there looking at her for a long moment, thinking about how much weight a 6-year-old carries without knowing it. I'm not going to tell you I'm fine. I'm not. Not fully, not yet. There are nights after Carol's asleep and the house is quiet and I am too tired to distract myself that I run the whole timeline back and look for the thing I missed, the moment I could have caught it earlier or changed something. I haven't found it. I don't think it's there. Some things happen to you that aren't your fault, and the hardest part isn't accepting that they happened. It's accepting that they weren't preventable, that you could have been doing everything right and still ended up here. I'm back to doubles at Marco's most weeks. The extra money goes into a savings account I opened for Carol, college fund, or whatever she needs it for when the time comes. The house is still mine. The live oak in the backyard is still there. Carol has decided she wants a tire swing instead of a treehouse, which honestly sounds easier to build, and I told her we'd do it in the spring. Some mornings I stand in the kitchen drinking my coffee before she wakes up, looking out at the backyard. And I think about everything that happened in this house, and everything that's still going to happen in it, and I feel this specific mix of grief and something that's almost like gratitude. Not for what happened, but for what's still here. The house, the live oak, the kid down the hall who sleeps with her arms spread like she owns the world. I asked her once, a few weeks ago, if she was okay. We were in the car driving back from soccer practice, the sun going down flat and orange over the fields off I-35. That particular Texas evening light that makes everything look a little like a movie. She said, "Yeah, I think so." Then she said, "Are you okay, Daddy?" I looked at her in the rearview mirror. 6 years old, shin guards still on, grass stain on her left knee. Yeah, I said. I think so too. I meant it, mostly. And mostly is enough for now.
So guys, I'm glad you've listened to this far, and if you enjoyed this story, please support the channel with a like and subscribe. Also, check out my other interesting stories in the upcoming videos. See you later!